So I need to tell you something that genuinely messed with my head when I was researching this. There was a man who had a normal job, a normal house, and went to church every single Sunday. He cried out sermons like actual tears, and he carried photos of his son in his pocket. And for almost 20 years, nobody, not his neighbors, not his co-workers, not even his wife, had any idea that he was killing women, dozens of them. He killed so many that at some point, he just lost count. His name was Gary Ridgway. And this is the story of how he got away with it for so long. So Gary grew up in a pretty regular working class family in Washington state. Nothing about his childhood screams, "This is going to go badly," except for one thing, his mom. And look, I'm not gonna say she caused all of this because that is too simple, but she was controlling in a genuinely disturbing way. She managed his money, she bought him clothes, even as an adult. She humiliated him in front of his whole family for things like bedwetting. Gary later told psychologists that by the time he was a teenager, he had his really uncomfortable mixed feelings towards his mother. Anger, resentment, and something even darker than that, which is already a lot, but here is the thing. At 16 years old, Gary lured a 6-year-old boy into the woods and stabbed him in the liver. The boy fortunately survived, and as Gary walked away, he was laughing. Nobody caught him, nobody even connected it to him. He just went home as if nothing ever happened. And I think about that a lot because that was obviously not a mistake. It wasn't even an accident. That is a 16-year-old who already knew exactly what he was capable of and faced zero consequences for it. So Gary eventually grows up, finishes school, then he joins the Navy and goes to Vietnam. And he even got married before he shipped out, which is kind of sweet, except that while he was overseas, he started paying regularly for sex and ended up catching gonorrhea. His wife found out, so his marriage didn't last long after he got back. And then he met someone new, and here is where the story takes a strange turn. Gary Ridgway became deeply, intensely religious. Like, he was preaching at strangers' doors on weekends, reading the Bible out loud at work, crying during sermons. He was really committed to the identity of being a good man, a God-fearing man. And here is the duality. At the same time, he was paying for sex constantly and had put his wife in a chokehold at least one time. Which, I mean, is a lot of contradiction to be carrying around, but Gary seemed completely unfazed by it. Like those two versions of himself just existed side by side, and he never saw a problem with it. Unfortunately for him though, his second marriage tragically ended too. By 1982, Gary was working as a spray painter in a truck factory in Renton, Washington. For him, it was a steady job. He stayed in the same place for years. He was a quiet guy. Nobody looked twice at him. And that same year, women started disappearing. So here is how it happened. Gary would drive along Pacific Highway South and look for women. Mostly sex workers, mostly teenagers, and a lot of them runaways. And this is the brutal truth of it. A lot of people weren't going to immediately report missing. It will pull over, it will be calm and friendly and act completely normal. And then it will show them photos of his son, just casually like, "Look, I'm a dad, I'm safe, you can trust me." Then it will strangle them, which is pretty much fucked up in my opinion. It will wrap his forearm around their throats from behind and pull back until they were unalived. Then it would drive to the wooded areas around the Green River and dump their bodies. Sometimes it would arrange them sometimes it will go back. And I know the last part is pretty weird, but the reason it went back actually matters, and I will get to it. Now, before I dive any further, I want to actually talk about some of these women, because it is really easy in a case this big to just let them become a statistic, and I don't want to do that. Wendy Caulfield was 16 years old. She was the first body pulled from the Green River in July 1982. Opal Mills, another woman, she was 16 years old, and she was also found 3 weeks later. Deborah Estes was 15 years old when she vanished in September 1982. They didn't find her remains for 6 years. And then there is another female named Wendy Stephens, 14 years old. She went missing in 1983, and for decades after that, she existed in police files as nothing but a label, and the label was Jane Doe B10. No name, no identity, just a case number. Her real name wasn't even confirmed until years later, after Gary was already sitting in prison. Damn. So of course the obvious question is, how did they not get caught? And honestly, when I went through the timeline of this, I found myself getting genuinely frustrated, because there were so many moments where it almost happened. For example, in 1983, a girl named Mary Melva disappeared. And here is the thing, her boyfriend and her pimp actually did the detective work themselves. They tracked down the truck she would been seen getting into and found it parked right outside Gary's house. Then they went to the police. The police knocked on Gary's door, and Gary said he didn't know anything about it. So they just left. And then in 1984, Gary took a lie detector test, but it passed it, which I don't know how or precisely what to do with that information, but there it is. In 1985, he tried to pay for an undercover police for sex. They arrested him, and then they let him go because he passed another lie detector test. Oh, this is really baffling. And again, in 1987, police took hair and saliva samples from him, which sounds like progress, right? Except they put those samples in storage and essentially didn't touch them for 14 years. 14 bloody years. While Gary simply continued his life, he went to work, went to church, and kept on killing and kept on his killing spree. So here is the sneaky part though. Gary was also actively working against the investigation the whole time. He did things like planting other people's cigarette butts and gum wrappers near the bodies to confuse forensics. And he was also doing things like moving some remains across state lines into Oregon, so different police departments would be handling separate cases and not talking to each other about it, which is pretty clever, but only to delay the inevitable. The task force got so desperate at one point that they started flying down to Florida to consult Ted Bundy, who was on death row at that time. And actually, Bundy told them the killer was probably going to go back to the dump site. It was right. Police staked out the sites. They still didn't catch Gary, unfortunately, which is kind of wild when you think about it. A serial killer gave them the right answer and it still didn't work. Now, here is the juicy part of this story I genuinely wasn't expecting. Around 1985, Gary met a woman named Judith Molson at a parents' group. They started dating, even fell in love, and got married in 1988. And the killings almost completely stopped. Out of 49 confirmed victims, only 3 were killed after he got married to Judith. Gary said in his confession that he genuinely loved her, that being with her, being happy at home, settled something inside him that he couldn't control on his own. Judith had absolutely no idea, of course. When she first moved into his house, she noticed there was no carpets anywhere. She thought it was an odd decorating choice. Detective later told her he would probably used it to wrap a body. She also remembered him leaving early some mornings. He told her it was overtime at the factory. She now believes those were the mornings he went out and killed someone. On the 30th of November 2001, police walked into Kenworth factory as Gary was finishing his shift and arrested him. It had been 19 years since when the Caulfield's body was found in the river. And the thing that finally got him were those saliva samples from 1987, the ones that sat in storage for 14 years. Now the new DNA technology had finally been used to test them, and they matched 4 of his victims. Gary Ridgway was 52 years old, and he has been at the same job in the same area the whole time. So now prosecutors have a decision to make. They had solid evidence on 4 victims. They could go to trial, probably win, and Gary will spend the rest of his life in prison. But there were still dozens of families who had no idea where their daughters were. No remains, no answers, nothing. So they made a deal. Gary pleaded guilty to 48 murders and cooperated fully. He then led investigators to the bodies and answered every questions they had in exchange for no death penalty will be enforced on him. And Gary spends the rest of his life in prison instead of being executed. Over 5 months, Gary sat down with detectives and just talked calmly, cooperatively, in the same tone you would use to describe your week. In one session, he estimated he has killed over 65 women. In another, it said 71. He said he honestly lost count, and the way he said it just sounded like a minor detail he couldn't pin down. And it's just genuinely one of the most chilling things about the whole case. He led investigators to 3 bodies that year. One of them was Mary Melva, the girl whose disappearance at first pointed police to his door back in 1983, 20 years ago. In December 2003, he was sentenced to 48 life sentences running back to back, plus 480 additional years for tampering with evidence. And in 2001, when a 49th victim was identified, he pleaded guilty again and was rightfully given 49 life sentences. The thing Gary said about why he did what he did, I think they are worth actually hearing. He said he specifically targeted sex workers because he believed the police wouldn't take their disappearances seriously, that nobody would come looking for them. And the thing is, he was right. That wasn't paranoia. That was an accurate read of the situation, and it kept him free for nearly 2 decades. He said he hated these women. He also said he couldn't stop seeking them out. He held these things at the same time and never seemed to find it contradictory. And why was the reason he went back to the bodies? He explained in this very flat, practical way. He said that it wasn't that he found it more satisfying. It was that it meant he didn't need to go and find someone new to kill, which reduces his risk of getting caught. He was so logical about it, managing himself like a problem to be solved. The detectives who spent 5 months interviewing him said he never got emotional. He never got agitated. He just answered questions like it was helping them fill out a form, which rings ASPD in my head. As of late 2025, Gary Ridgway is 76 years old and still in a cell in Washington State. In 2024, he was quietly moved to King County Jail for a few days, and nobody explained why. The reason came out in March 2025. He would been brought in to help investigators try to find more remains. He is 76 years old, and they are still asking him where the bodies are, because some of them still haven't been found. There are a bunch of them who had been missing since 1982 and 1983. No remains were ever recovered. So that is the case that piqued my interest today, and I thought you might all also find it fascinating. Like and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. See you in the next stories, and I hope this particular story didn't stress you out much. Thank you for watching.